On the morning of December 7th, 1941, at precisely 9:17 a.m., Commander Minoru Genda positioned himself on the flight deck of the aircraft carrier Akagi, approximately 230 nautical miles north of Oahu. He observed the second wave of Japanese strike aircraft as they departed southward toward their targets at Pearl Harbor. Genda had served as the primary tactical architect for Operation AI, the code name assigned to the Pearl Harbor attack plan. His involvement began in January 1941, when Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto first proposed the concept to the Naval General Staff. Throughout 11 months of planning, Genda developed attack protocols, coordinated training exercises, and compiled intelligence assessments. His work drew upon reconnaissance data collected by Japanese naval attachés stationed in Hawaii, photographic analysis of American installations, and estimates of U.S. Pacific Fleet capabilities. The intelligence package included detailed information on American battleship positions, aircraft inventory at airfields across Oahu, and defensive measures including radar installations and patrol patterns. Japanese intelligence officers had accurately identified the locations of American fuel storage facilities, dry dock capacities, and repair infrastructure. They possessed current data on ship movements and maintenance schedules. The tactical intelligence information required for executing the attack met professional standards for military operations of that era. However, the strategic intelligence, the broader assessment of American military capacity and mobilization potential, contained a fundamental miscalculation that would determine the war's outcome. The Japanese Naval General Staff's planning documents from 1941 projected that by December 1943, the United States Navy would maintain approximately 13,070 officers and 296,000 enlisted personnel. These figures informed all subsequent Japanese strategic planning for the Pacific War. The actual strength of the United States Navy on December 31st, 1943, according to official Naval Personnel Bureau records, totaled 219 to 279 officers, 172 officer candidates enrolled in training programs, and 343 enlisted personnel. When these categories are combined, the total exceeds 2.37 million naval personnel. The Japanese estimate missed this figure by a factor of approximately 8 to 1. This discrepancy was not a minor statistical error or a reasonable miscalculation given the uncertainties of wartime planning. It represented a complete failure to understand the mobilization capacity of the United States. More critically, Japanese naval leadership would not recognize the magnitude of this error until mid-1943, by which time the strategic situation had become irreversible. If you appreciate detailed, evidence-based World War II history that examines the intelligence and planning failures that shaped major campaigns, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our audience includes viewers from Adelaide to Anchorage, from military history professors to veterans of later conflicts. Your engagement helps us continue producing these in-depth historical documentaries. The Imperial Japanese Navy's intelligence apparatus operated through several distinct organizations with overlapping responsibilities. The third section of the Naval General Staff handled intelligence collection and analysis for operational planning. The Navy Ministry maintained separate intelligence functions focused on policy and diplomatic matters. Individual fleet commands operated their own intelligence sections for tactical purposes. This organizational structure created coordination problems that affected intelligence quality. The Naval General Staff's intelligence section employed approximately 80 officers in 1941, responsible for analyzing information concerning all potential adversaries across the Pacific, Asia, and beyond. By comparison, the United States Office of Naval Intelligence employed over 300 personnel in Washington alone by 1940, with additional staff at district intelligence offices nationwide. Japanese naval culture placed greater emphasis on operational assignments than intelligence work. Officers viewed intelligence billets as secondary to command positions or staff roles in operations planning. Career progression favored those who served in fleet assignments or prestigious staff positions. Intelligence work offered limited opportunities for promotion or recognition. This cultural bias affected both the quantity and quality of personnel assigned to intelligence duties. The institutional attitude toward intelligence influenced how intelligence assessments were received by decision makers. When intelligence officers produced analyses that contradicted operational plans or questioned strategic assumptions, their reports faced skepticism from operations staff who had already committed to specific courses of action. The organizational hierarchy gave operations planners greater authority than intelligence officers in strategic discussions. Japanese intelligence collection methods in the pre-war period included several effective programs. Naval attachés stationed at Japanese embassies worldwide submitted regular reports on foreign naval developments. The Navy maintained a technical intelligence unit that analyzed foreign military publications, patents, and academic research. Signals intelligence units monitored foreign naval communications. Human intelligence operations recruited agents in foreign ports and naval facilities. These collection programs produced substantial quantities of raw intelligence data. Japanese intelligence files contained information about American shipbuilding programs, naval construction budgets, and fleet organization. They possessed copies of Jane's fighting ships and other reference works that documented American naval strength. Technical journals published information about American naval technology and weapon systems. Census data provided information about American population demographics. The failure was not in collection, but in analysis. Intelligence officers examined this data through the lens of their own institutional experiences and cultural assumptions. They applied Japanese organizational models to interpret American practices. They used Japanese training standards to estimate American personnel requirements. They projected Japanese limitations onto American capabilities. Intelligence analysis requires understanding not only what an adversary does, but why they do it. Analysts must comprehend the cultural, institutional, and strategic logic that drives enemy decision-making. This requirement creates persistent challenges for intelligence organizations, particularly when analyzing adversaries with fundamentally different cultural frameworks. Intelligence professionals identify this challenge as mirror imaging, the tendency to assume that adversaries think, operate, and value the same things as one's own organization. Mirror imaging occurs when analysts unconsciously project their own assumptions onto the enemy they are studying. The problem becomes particularly acute when cultural differences create significantly different approaches to military organization. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized quality over quantity in personnel management. The Imperial Japanese Navy recruited carefully, trained extensively, and expected long-term service from its sailors. Officer candidates underwent rigorous selection processes followed by years of professional development. Enlisted sailors received thorough technical training in their specialties. The service maintained high-performance standards throughout careers that typically lasted decades. This approach produced highly skilled personnel who operated complex weapon systems efficiently. Japanese sailors demonstrated exceptional competence in night combat, torpedo attacks, and damage control procedures during the early war period. The emphasis on individual skill and unit cohesion created formidable combat effectiveness within the available force structure. However, this personnel system had inherent limitations. Training programs required years to produce qualified personnel. Expansion required proportional increases in training capacity. which took time to develop. The cultural emphasis on careful selection meant that mass recruitment programs would dilute quality standards. The entire institutional framework assumed that building an effective navy required patient development of professional personnel. Japanese intelligence officers analyzing American naval practices assumed that similar constraints would apply. They examined American ship construction programs and calculated crew requirements based on Japanese manning standards. They observed American training facilities and estimated throughput based on Japanese training timelines. They reviewed American recruitment policies and projected expansion rates consistent with Japanese mobilization patterns. These analytical methods seemed reasonable. Why would the Americans operate differently than any other professional navy? Surely any military organization would recognize the importance of proper training and careful personnel development. The assumption that American practices would follow broadly similar patterns to Japanese practices appeared logical. The assumption was completely wrong. American naval culture operated on different principles. The United States Navy had historical experience with rapid wartime expansion. During World War I, American naval personnel increased from approximately 65,000 in 1916 to over 530,000 by 1918. The service demonstrated the capacity to recruit, train, and deploy hundreds of thousands of personnel within 2 years. Institutional memory of this expansion influenced planning for potential future conflicts. American military culture accepted shorter training programs that emphasized basic competency over mastery. Training philosophies focused on getting adequate personnel to the fleet quickly, then continuing development through on-the-job experience. The system prioritized quantity and accepted somewhat lower individual skill levels, compensating through numbers and technological advantages. This approach contradicted Japanese assumptions about proper military personnel development. The Battle of Midway, fought June 4–7, 1942, provided Japanese intelligence officers with direct evidence that their personnel estimates contained serious errors. The battle resulted in the loss of 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, with approximately 3,000 Japanese casualties, including many irreplaceable aviators. American losses included the carrier Yorktown and the destroyer Haman, with fewer than 400 casualties. The tactical outcome received extensive analysis within Japanese naval circles. However, specific aspects of American performance during the battle raised questions about personnel strength that should have prompted broader reassessment. The carrier Yorktown demonstrated damage control capabilities that seemed inconsistent with Japanese understanding of American manning levels. On June 4, 1942, at approximately noon, Japanese carrier aircraft attacked Yorktown with 3 250-kilogram bombs. The first bomb penetrated the flight deck and exploded inside the ship, causing fires and damaging multiple compartments. The second bomb detonated in the funnel uptake, knocking out several boilers. The third bomb penetrated to the fourth deck before exploding, causing additional fires and structural damage. By 2:40 p.m., damage control parties had controlled the fires, patched the flight deck holes with steel plates, and restored partial power. The ship increased speed from 0 to 20 knots. At approximately 4 p.m., less than 4 hours after the attack, Yorktown resumed flight operations, launching combat air patrol aircraft and recovering returning strike aircraft. Later that afternoon, Japanese torpedo aircraft attacked again, striking Yorktown with 2 Type 91 aerial torpedoes. The explosions ruptured fuel tanks, flooded machinery spaces, and caused severe list. The ship lost all power. The captain ordered abandon ship. Yorktown remained afloat for 2 more days before finally sinking on June 7th after being struck by torpedoes from Japanese submarine I-168. Japanese after-action analysts studied Yorktown's damage control performance extensively. Documents recovered from the wreckage included organizational charts and personnel assignments. These documents revealed that Yorktown carried over 200 crew members, significantly more than Japanese estimates suggested. American carriers operated with. Japanese fleet carriers of the Shokaku class, comparable to Yorktown in size and capability, operated with approximately 1,660 crew. Japanese intelligence had assumed American carriers would have similar manning, perhaps 10–15% higher, to account for different organizational practices. The actual American manning was approximately 33% higher than Japanese carriers, providing substantial additional personnel for damage control and other functions. The implications were significant. Additional personnel meant more damage control parties available to fight fires, plug leaks, and restore systems. It meant backup teams ready to replace casualties. It meant reserves of trained personnel who could be redirected to critical problems. Japanese damage control doctrine relied on small, highly trained specialist teams. American practice employed larger numbers of personnel with broader responsibilities. The Yorktown's performance demonstrated practical consequences of higher manning levels. Despite suffering damage that should have proven fatal based on Japanese experience, American damage control teams kept the ship operational. The carrier recovered from attacks that would have sunk a Japanese vessel within minutes. This resilience came directly from having more trained personnel available to address battle damage. The Guadalcanal campaign, beginning August 7, 1942, marked the first major American offensive operation in the Pacific theater. Japanese intelligence assessments of American forces committed to this operation revealed additional discrepancies with pre-war estimates of American strength. Japanese intelligence staff estimated that American forces in the South Pacific would be constrained by limited personnel availability. They projected that initial American offensive operations would involve perhaps 2 reinforced Marine battalions, approximately 8,000 to 10,000 troops total. Naval support would likely include 1 or 2 carriers with associated screening forces, perhaps 15 to 20 ships total. The actual American commitment exceeded these estimates substantially. The 1st Marine Division landed 11,000 personnel on Guadalcanal on August 7th. Additional forces secured Tulagi, Gavutu, and Tanambogo. Total American ground forces committed to the initial landing exceeded 16,000 Marines. Supporting naval forces included 3 carriers, Enterprise, Saratoga, and Wasp, 1 battleship, North Carolina, 14 cruisers, and 31 destroyers. Japanese submarine commanders operating near the Solomon Islands reported convoy traffic that seemed inconsistent with Tokyo's assessment of American logistical capacity. Transport vessels moved supplies to Guadalcanal on regular schedules despite Japanese attempts at interdiction. The Americans maintained continuous supply lines across thousands of miles of ocean while simultaneously supporting Atlantic convoy operations against German U-boats. The mathematics troubled Japanese intelligence analysts. If the Americans had fewer than 400,000 total naval personnel, as pre-war estimates suggested, how could they simultaneously operate major fleet concentrations in both Pacific and Atlantic theaters? How could they maintain extensive supply lines while also conducting training programs for new personnel? How could they garrison island bases while also preparing forces for future offensive operations? Field commanders submitted reports questioning the official estimates. Logistical officers calculated that the supply flow to Guadalcanal required merchant marine crews numbering in the thousands, in addition to Navy personnel operating combat vessels. Combat commanders observed American task forces with screening forces larger than expected. Intelligence officers noted radio intercepts suggesting more extensive American forces than pre-war estimates indicated. These observations reached Tokyo but produced limited reassessment. Senior staff officers suggested alternative explanations. Perhaps the Americans had temporarily concentrated forces from multiple theater commands for this particular operation. Perhaps they were accepting risks in other areas to mass forces for the Solomon Islands campaign. Perhaps the supply efforts were unsustainable, and American forces would soon reach their logistical limits. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, possessed greater understanding of American capabilities than most Japanese officers. He had studied at Harvard University from 1919 to 1921, where he completed graduate coursework in economics and English literature. He subsequently served as naval attaché in Washington from 1926 to 1928, giving him direct observation of American industrial capacity and social organization. Yamamoto opposed war with the United States based on his assessment of American industrial and mobilization potential. In meetings with government officials during 1940 and 1941, he argued that Japan could not win a prolonged war against American economic resources. His famous statement that he could run wild for 6 months to a year, but had utterly no confidence in Japanese prospects for a second or third year of war, reflected his understanding of comparative national capabilities. Despite his reservations, Yamamoto executed the Pearl Harbor attack plan as ordered and subsequently commanded Japanese naval forces through the Coral Sea, Midway, and Solomon Islands campaigns. By February 1943, he had observed American naval operations for over a year of combat. What he saw increasingly contradicted the intelligence estimates that informed Japanese strategic planning. On February 18, 1943, Yamamoto sent a classified cable to Naval General Staff Headquarters in Tokyo. The communication requested comprehensive reassessment of American naval personnel strength based on observed deployments. The cable noted that American forces operating in the Pacific had grown to levels inconsistent with pre-war projections. Either the Americans had stripped Atlantic theater forces to concentrate everything in the Pacific, which seemed unlikely given ongoing Battle of the Atlantic operations, or the fundamental personnel estimates were wrong. Yamamoto's inquiry included specific questions. What was the current assessment of total American naval personnel? What evidence supported that assessment? Had intelligence collection revealed information suggesting the pre-war estimates required revision? What alternative explanations existed for observed American force levels? The cable's tone was formal but direct. Field commanders were operating based on assumptions about enemy strength that no longer matched observed reality. This situation created planning problems and operational risks. The Naval General Staff needed to determine whether the assumptions were correct and adjust planning accordingly. The Naval General Staff assigned Yamamoto's inquiry to a working group within the Naval Intelligence Division. The group included intelligence officers specializing in American naval analysis and operations planners who understood how personnel numbers translated into fleet capabilities. They received instructions to examine all available evidence without regard to whether conclusions matched existing assumptions. The working group operated from March through November 1943, reviewing intelligence collected over the previous 18 months. Their methodology involved systematic examination of multiple intelligence sources. Submarine patrol reports documented ship sightings in various theater areas. Radio intercepts revealed unit designations and organizational structures. Prisoner interrogations provided direct testimony from American sailors. Captured documents included operations orders and personnel rosters. The analysts counted every American vessel reported across all theaters: Pacific, Atlantic, Mediterranean, and training areas. They calculated minimum crew requirements using documented American mining standards from captured operations manuals. They cross-referenced multiple sources to verify observations and eliminate duplicate counts. Preliminary totals indicated American naval personnel strength exceeded $850,000 as of mid-1943. This figure was more than double the official estimates used in Japanese war planning. However, the analysis revealed additional factors that drove the total higher. American vessels operated with significantly larger crews than Japanese estimates assumed. Carriers had 30 to 50% more personnel than Japanese calculations suggested. Destroyers and cruisers similarly showed higher manning than projected. When American manning standards documented in captured training manuals were applied to observed ship counts, the estimated American personnel strength approached 1.2 million. This figure still excluded the training pipeline, recruits in basic training, students in technical schools, and units conducting pre-deployment workups. It also excluded the extensive shore establishment of administrative and support personnel at naval bases worldwide. One captured document proved particularly revealing. An American destroyer's crew roster recovered after a night surface action off Kolombangara showed 329 names. Japanese destroyers of comparable size operated with crews of approximately 200. The 65% difference in manning provided direct evidence that American personnel practices diverged significantly from Japanese assumptions. The working group compiled findings in a comprehensive report submitted November 9, 1943. The document estimated current American naval personnel strength at approximately 1.8 million, with projected growth to 2.4 million by mid-1944 based on observed expansion rates. The estimate remained conservative. Actual American strength would exceed even these revised figures, but it was substantially closer to reality than pre-war projections. An appendix analyzed strategic implications. If Americans had nearly 2 million sailors currently in service, with continued expansion, they could operate major fleet concentrations in multiple theaters simultaneously without mutual support. They could conduct unrestricted offensive operations in the Pacific while maintaining full Atlantic convoy operations. They could sustain combat losses at rates Japan could never match and still expand total force strength. They could maintain extensive logistics networks moving supplies across vast ocean distances. They could garrison island bases with permanent personnel rather than rotating limited forces. The report concluded that every assumption informing Japanese strategy for the past 2 years was invalidated by these numbers. The defensive perimeter strategy, assuming limited American forces unable to attack multiple points simultaneously, was obsolete. The quick war scenario depending on American war weariness was impossible. The Americans were not running out of manpower. They would keep building ships and training crews until Japan was overwhelmed by numerical superiority. The working group's report reached senior naval leadership in late November 1943. Admiral Shigetaro Shimada, serving as Navy Minister, received a copy. Senior officers on the Naval General Staff reviewed the findings carefully. The evidence was overwhelming, the methodology sound, and the conclusions logically derived from verified observations. However, widespread distribution of these findings would create institutional and political crises. If field commanders understood that the war was mathematically unwinnable based on personnel ratios alone, morale would suffer. Combat effectiveness depends partly on belief in possible victory. Sailors and officers who understood they faced 10-to-1 numerical disadvantages might lose will to fight. If the government understood that naval intelligence had miscalculated so fundamentally at the most basic level, there would be demands for accountability. Leadership changes during wartime create instability and undermine command authority. If Emperor Hirohito learned that the war began based on intelligence estimates wrong by a factor of 8-to-1, the entire military leadership structure could could be held responsible for strategic disaster. Senior officers made decisions about information control. The report was classified at the highest security level. Distribution was restricted to fewer than 20 officers with direct operational need to know. The information was contained and controlled. Official estimates were quietly updated and internal planning documents used for resource allocation and operational planning. However, no public announcement was made. No strategic reassessment was ordered that would require explaining why fundamental assumptions had changed. Field commanders were not informed of the revised estimates. They continued planning operations based on assumptions that Americans were overextended and approaching manpower limits. Staff officers continued to brief that American expansion had natural constraints that would soon become apparent. Strategic discussions continued to reference the possibility that America would accept negotiated settlement rather than sustain prolonged conflict. The institutional incentives favored suppression rather than revelation. Admitting error required acknowledging that the entire basis for continuing the war was flawed. It required accepting that senior leaders had failed in their fundamental responsibility to understand the enemy before committing the nation to conflict. It required confronting questions about whether continuing the war served any rational purpose if victory was mathematically impossible. The system chose preservation over truth. The war continued as if nothing had changed, even though everything had changed. By June 1944, the strategic situation had deteriorated substantially from Japan's perspective. American forces advanced through the Marshall Islands in February, capturing Kwajalein and Eniwetok. In May, American forces secured Hollandia in New Guinea, bypassing Japanese strongpoints and advancing toward the Philippines. The Central Pacific Offensive threatened to cut Japan's communications with resource areas in Southeast Asia. The Imperial Japanese Navy committed its remaining carrier forces to Operation A-Go, intended as a decisive engagement that would cripple American offensive capability. The plan called for Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's mobile fleet to engage American carrier forces in the Philippine Sea, while land-based aircraft from airfields in the Marianas would provide additional striking power. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, fought June 19 to 20, 1944, demonstrated the cumulative effects of American numerical superiority. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher's Task Force 58 included 15 fleet and light carriers, 7 fast battleships, 21 cruisers, and 69 destroyers. The force operated approximately 900 aircraft and embarked over 70,000 personnel. To place this in perspective, the entire Imperial Japanese Navy at the war's start in December 1941 numbered fewer than 400,000 personnel across all branches, shore establishments, training commands, and administrative functions. The Americans were fielding single task forces with manning levels representing nearly 18% of Japan's total pre-war naval strength, and they operated multiple such task forces simultaneously in different operational areas. The battle resulted in catastrophic Japanese losses. 3 carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Hyo, were sunk. Approximately 450 Japanese aircraft were destroyed, along with their pilots and air crews. American losses totaled 123 aircraft and 109 airmen. The material and personnel balance shifted further in America's favor. What struck Japanese observers more than tactical outcomes was American operational resilience. Task Force 58 absorbed Japanese attacks without significant degradation of capability. Damage control parties repaired minor damage rapidly. Lost aircraft were replaced from reserves. The task force maintained offensive operations throughout the engagement and immediately afterward pursued the retreating mobile fleet. Japanese forces had no comparable depth. Every loss was permanent and irreplaceable. Every pilot killed represented years of training lost. Every aircraft destroyed removed capability that Japan's limited industrial base could not quickly replace. The mathematics of attrition favored the side with greater resources at every level, and America had resources Japan could not match regardless of fighting spirit or tactical skill. The final accounting of the intelligence failure can be expressed in simple numerical terms. Japan began the war with approximately 120,000 naval personnel, officers, enlisted sailors, and support staff. The nation expanded this force to approximately 300,000 by 1945 through sustained mobilization efforts. A threefold increase over 4 years represented impressive expansion for a nation of Japan's size and industrial capacity. The United States began the war with approximately 337,000 naval personnel in December 1941. By war's end, in August 1945, that force had grown to over 380,000, a tenfold increase achieved in less than 4 years. The Americans trained and deployed more sailors in the single year of 1944 than Japan had in its entire navy at peak wartime strength. The pre-war Japanese estimate projected 296,000 American naval personnel by December 1943. The actual figure was 374,094. The miscalculation factor was 8.0 to 1. This was not an excusable error resulting from incomplete information or deceptive enemy practices. Japanese intelligence officers had access to most required information through multiple channels. Prisoner interrogations provided direct testimony from Americans who experienced the training system. Radio intercepts revealed organizational structures indicating force sizes. Ship sighting reports documented force levels in different theaters. Technical publications provided details about American training facilities and manning policies. The failure was analytical rather than empirical. Intelligence officers could not conceive of an enemy that mobilized the way America did. They interpreted data through their own cultural and organizational framework. They saw an American Navy that functioned like the Imperial Japanese Navy because that was the only model they understood. Every data point was filtered through assumptions about how navies worked, how personnel were trained, how units were organized, how mobilization proceeded, assumptions based entirely on Japanese experience and Japanese practices. These assumptions were fundamentally wrong when applied to America. The intelligence officers were victims of cultural constraints, unable to see beyond their institutional blinders, even as evidence accumulated that contradicted those assumptions. Commander Chikataka Nakajima served with the 2nd Fleet and Combined Fleet from December 1941 through August 1945. His duties included intelligence analysis, capability assessments, and operational lessons extraction. After Japan's surrender, American naval intelligence officers interviewed Nakajima extensively about Japanese intelligence capabilities and assessments of American strength throughout the war. The Americans wanted to understand their enemy's perceptions. They sought to identify intelligence successes and failures on both sides. They asked Nakajima directly about the catastrophic miscalculation regarding American manpower mobilization. Nakajima's explanation was candid. Japanese naval intelligence had been organizationally weak throughout the pre-war period and during the war. The service was chronically understaffed relative to mission requirements. Intelligence assignments carried lower prestige than combat or command billets, affecting both recruitment and retention of capable officers. Intelligence officers who raised concerns about American capabilities, especially concerns suggesting Japan was overmatched, were often dismissed by operations officers who had already committed to specific courses of action. The organizational system was not designed to challenge fundamental assumptions or question strategic premises established by senior leadership. It was designed to support decisions already made by providing confirming information and tactical details. When intelligence assessments contradicted operational plans or suggested strategic assumptions might be wrong. The intelligence was questioned rather than the plans. Accurate assessment requires institutional capability to accept uncomfortable truths. The Japanese system was not built to accept such truths when they conflicted with institutional preferences or strategic commitments. The cultural emphasis on offensive action and decisive battle made it difficult for intelligence officers to argue for caution based on assessments of enemy capabilities. Wars are lost through fundamental miscalculations about who you are fighting and what resources they can bring to bear. Japanese planners looked at America and saw a nation that would mobilize the way Japan mobilized, slowly and carefully, with emphasis on quality over quantity. They estimated manpower requirements using Japanese models and Japanese assumptions about training time and personnel development. They prepared to fight a war against an enemy that existed primarily in their imaginations, an enemy matching their preconceptions about how modern industrial nations conducted warfare. The real enemy operated on a completely different scale with completely different assumptions about what was possible. The real enemy had effectively unlimited manpower reserves and organizational capacity to convert civilians into sailors within months rather than years. The real enemy could sustain losses that would have destroyed Japan and still expand total force strength. The real enemy could fight multiple major wars simultaneously in different hemispheres without choosing between them. That enemy destroyed Japan not because American sailors were individually superior or American ships were better designed, though both were often true, but because there were simply so many more of them. So many more that Japanese intelligence could not imagine the numbers even when evidence accumulated that should have made the truth obvious. The intelligence estimate projected 296,000 American sailors by December 1943. The actual number was 2,374.94. That gap between assumption and reality, between what Japan thought it was fighting and what it actually faced, tells the complete story of how one catastrophic intelligence failure determined the outcome of the Pacific War before the war truly began. The numbers were always available in American technical publications, census data, and industrial statistics. The data was accessible to anyone who wanted to examine it. What was missing was the ability to see beyond cultural assumptions and organizational limitations to understand an enemy that operated on a completely different scale with completely different rules. That blindness, that inability to see what should have been obvious, cost Japan everything it fought to preserve.